do it, then I can
I
do
just
it
hit
and
go.
then go. Oh, damn it. Hello and welcome to Let's Drone Out. Tonight you are joined by everyone's favourite Curry Kidden,
Sorry for talking.
our Lord and Master Frank,
Good evening.
The man with the moustache Stephen,
Evening all.
and the rich but breathy, dirty McStinky Chris.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. Let's start the show. I believe Frank, you set this up.
Yes, so, well, I mean, a while back there was the Pop and Model show where there was a load of tiny wheat racing sort of representing the FPV world there. And so I got slightly involved in that. I made some trophies for that. So I was in a group chat with Chris G and Chris Dirty McStinky, who we have on tonight, and a few other people. And so I thought, it's the beginning of October. The weather will have been turning by then. We'll be, deep in our hibernations by now. It would be good to have some sort of updates on what the tiny whoops are doing. It's still quite summery outside at the moment, but nevertheless, we have Chris on. So thank you very much for joining us.
That's all right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, because you kind of ran the racing, right? Is my understanding at the Popham show?
Yeah, so Chris G has the works. Well, he flies with Popham Airfield. Last year, he had an event going on, but there wasn't really any kind of tiny whoop going on. He had like 5-inch race gates in a tiny whoop enclosure, and kind of just asked me to fly around them for a few hours, and which was great because I didn't have to fight for VTX time at all. Like none of the people that were flying wings there didn't bother with VTXs. Sorry, didn't bother with FPV. So we had the whole day to do it, which was a bit of a nightmare trying to manage the batteries, keeping them going so that spectators were there. We got to see that, and then this year was much bigger. We had a much bigger turnout. Lots of people come to see. I did run the races. I did a 2-day event because I wanted to do. So when I say 2-day event, I mean I did a race one on one day and a race one on another day, which is why you ended up making 6 trophies. I think it was.
Yeah, 6 trophies. Yeah.
Yeah, and the only reason why I did that was because we had some pilots who said at the outset that they couldn't make the first day or the second day, so I didn't want to exclude them from a 2-day event. So we just did single races on each day and then gave out prizes.
Nice.
It was really good fun. It was the tent was massive, so I think next year we're going to try and get even more of the tent because there was just so much space to play with inside. there were only a few stands there.
Yeah, I mean, for context for anyone who hasn't been to any of the Popham events, so Popham is a manned airfield where they have a load of microlights and things flying in and out, and they also have the Light Aircraft Association sort of rally, which means for that event they get in some really, really big marquees to hold in all the various stalls for that event, and they happen to have the Popham Model Show very close to that event, and so the marquee people don't take the marquee down. So there's an absolutely enormous marquee sitting next to the runway that gets shut down for the big model flying, so that there's enough space for jets and turbines to fly on this what is usually a manned runway, but gets shut down for the event for model flying. And then there's this really, really, really big marquee that has otherwise sits empty. And so basically were there any I think previously there's been some like model railway stuff in a corner somewhere and like some little buggies in the corner somewhere.
Yeah, so they have like a little water display. They had tanks. I think last year they had slightly more in terms of the displays because they had planes, tanks, they had a railway system, but this year was. So they did have the model railways. They still had the waterworks and the tanks, which was really good. We got a chap called Mike, who's based over in the Race Castle area. He does a lot of small crawlers, and we got him to come and do a stand as well. Got people really interested in that. So it was a good. We had like I don't know. I'd like to say we had like the lion's share of spectators there because where it was situated by the airfield, the natural flow of spectators was out of the airfield straight into the tent, and then they just come and sort of sat around the netted area and just watched us fly.
Yeah, and you presumably got this huge space to then fill with bits of track equipment, whatever you can get hold of.
Yeah, so well, fortunately, I'm a member of the Hanworth Tiny Whoop Club, and they've already got a load of gates that I basically nicked out of storage and used all of those. So we managed to populate the area with tons of LED gates. We even used some of Chris's 5-inch gates. There was like a massive cubed 5-inch gate right in the middle of it all that we made a feature out of and had to fly around. So
nice.
it was really good.
So on the subject of tiny whoops and racing, I feel the definition of a whoop has gone a bit broad these days in terms of what you can have in size and motor and like motor KV or power. Do you have rules about what a tiny whoop is for racing terms?
Yeah, so definitely with the advent of these new frames, like the Pro versions, they definitely sort of convolute and people have to be a bit more restrictive or define specifically what the whoop is. But to me, a tiny whoop really is something that's at 65 mils. I don't really have anything, so it's the size of my hand essentially is roughly the size of a whoop, and then the one up from that's 65 millimeters. The one up from that is 75. People call them whoops, but I mean, there's so much more power to weight ratio in them that you can do a lot more. They're more outdoor friendly. They can still fly through a bit of gust of wind, whereas a 65 millimeter will quite easily get knocked off course, even with the mildest gust of wind. So I would say anything from a 65 millimeter frame to the Pro frame, which is just ever so slightly bigger. It's about 5 mil bigger on each, 5 or 4 mil bigger on each.
Is that the 45 millimeter prop version versus 40 mil?
So that's the 75 Pro version. So they've got a 65 Pro and a 75 Pro. The Pro version is 45 millimeters prop size. Standard 75 millimeters is 40 mil props, and then you're at 35, I believe, for the Pro version, and then it's 31.
And what are you designing the tracks for? What size do you have in mind when you think about the gaps and the speed and all that?
65 millimeters. So the gates, we try to build all of the gates, or we try to encourage people to build all of the gates to at least a 50 centimeter post by post, so that all of the gates are sort of regulation size essentially, or they're all the same size regardless of what whoop event you might go to. So with that size, trying to fit a 75 millimeter through that at speed can be a bit tricky sometimes. So it's often best, or normally we'll just define straight up that none of the bigger quads will just have 65 only. We'll accept 65 Pro because it's still within that sort of same size range, and I think people feel like it gives them a slight advantage because you're running a slightly bigger prop. But I've seen people on standard 65 millimeters completely trash Pro flyers. Yeah. So,
and presumably you can go longer without the battery dying as well, so a wee bit more efficient with a big prop.
Yeah, slightly more efficient. You could definitely get maybe 30 seconds more flight time out of it, and it kind of really just depends on how aggressive you are on the throttle. Like on average, you could probably get about, I don't know, about 4 minutes if you were really gentle and you were just cruising around. Probably 4 minutes on a 65 millimeter, and then if you were to go up to 75, you're probably looking at about 6-7 minutes. But it all depends on the build, how light you make it. Because I think, regardless of the KV that you can run on a motor, regardless of the flight controller that you're using or the camera that you're using, it's ultimately always going to come down to the weight ratio that you're pushing. So the lighter you can make your whoop, the better it is going to fly, the longer it's going to fly, the more you can do with it.
So we're not in winter yet, and people may not be, stuck indoors having to race indoors, but they might be thinking about buying parts and perhaps upgrading last year's or things they have in the cupboard. What would you recommend? What's your kind of go-to choice of components that you prefer to race at the moment?
So for me then, so the camera is the Foxeer Pico camera. it's just the easiest one to get in the UK. Unfortunately, there's like a major shortage of wood parts in the UK. There aren't many. You've got all your major shops, but every time they get something in, like some new frames or some batteries or something, they're just gone instantly. So you tend to find you'll end up be buying from China, or you'll be paying the huge costs for shipping from America. But for products, normally I would use Foxeer Pico or the Tiny Whip Pinch. For a camera. For a flight controller, I prefer the diamond, the Happy. So that there's this Happy model make this board called a diamond board, which is normally the boards are either just square shaped by like square, but they're 25mm by 25mm mounting, or you can get the cross shaped boards, which are a bit easier to fit into some of the pro frames because they actually make the hole, the mounting hole for the flight controller slightly smaller. It's more
They're like scallop sides, aren't they, instead of straight sides? So they fit with the bigger ducts.
Yeah, so I prefer the diamond purely because of its weight. It's really light. It's analog, but you can put a HDC VTX on it if you want to. Motors, so that's a tricky. Well, it's not a tricky one. For me, I've actually started winding my own motors.
Wow.
Crazy man, you might say. Yeah, stupid. Yeah.
That is a small motor to be winding. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're chasing the grams, winding your own motors can literally knock off a half a gram in total of the entire build, and a half a gram on a whoop that weighs maybe 17 is just like 20%. It's ridiculous. So it really does pay dividends. Plus, there are some efficiencies to be bagged from winding your own motors. But generally,
so do you wind them to get a higher kV, or what are you aiming for?
24,000 is my golden ratio kV. I don't really. I think anything higher, you're just dumping current into the motors, and anything lower, you're really going to be pushing too much through potentially the flight controller, and you could pop an ESC on there.
Right. Now, are those motors? The Tiny Whoop motors had kind of this kV competition where everyone was claiming higher and higher kVs. Are the ratings to be trusted on Tiny Whoop motors? Is the kV rating real, or are they just imaginary numbers?
I think it's ballpark. Whenever you see a kV on a motor, it's always ballpark. I think the actual science to get an exact kV is actually quite difficult to do because you've got to. It depends on the wire thickness, the number of winds you put on it. So I always take them as sort of like a rough, but if you're going to do freestyling in a whoop, then absolutely something like 25, 26, 30. I mean, like there's a chap in America called Ciotti who he swears blind to using higher kV motors, but I kind of tend to disagree because I think you're just wasting a lot of current from the battery. You could quite easily perform some of the same tricks you could do on a 26,000 kV motor versus a 30. So, but for me, for racing personally, 24 is the golden ratio. I prefer that. It's just very difficult to find motors that are actually off the shelf at 24k. Most of them are either 26, 27. You can get some 22s and some 20,000s. They're pretty decent. So for the motors that I would recommend, on a 65mm, for me, I prefer 702s. So and that refers, the numbers referring to the actual size of the stator itself in millimeters in height and in width. 702s aren't the smallest motors you can get, but they're going to be the lightest in power to weight ratio.
They're about the smallest you can get, I think. That's smaller than a 603, isn't it?
Just ever, it's 603 is taller, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's 50% taller than a 702. So
yeah. So you're probably right there. I think I always thought that you can get. I thought you could get 602s, but I'm not entirely sure now.
Maybe. It's quite a new size, that one, isn't it? They kind of appeared last year, the 0702s.
Yeah. I suspect we haven't seen, with the advent of all of these different types of frames that are coming out that are experimenting with different prop sizes, I kind of suspect that we're going to end up seeing something like 702.5s and 802.5s, and the incremental increases just to see if you actually gain any benefit out of having a slightly bigger stator, and you do in most instances. There is a downside, like they say the most efficient motor is an 802 motor, and it is quite efficient, but its weight, it's just bigger, so it just adds more weight unnecessarily to the whoop when you could be flying something that's super lightweight. So it's
I think I remember. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, because it all comes down to weight, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I remember a French guy. I can't remember his name, but he did all his flights in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere and had this kind of whoop dungeon set up underneath.
Angry Don.
Angry Don, yeah, and he was pushing for the 0702 motors and also the kind of ultra lightweight, smaller flight controllers as well. So a lot of this stuff has come from him, and I think he had some spectacular falling out with the manufacturers after kind of getting these ideas built. It looks like we're starting to reap the rewards of his work now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame actually, because he was kind of innovative in the whoop scene, and he was really pushing some really cool designs, some new sort of like canopy designs, and yeah, he kind of just sort of, it all went a little bit south for him, really. I think with Happy Model, and I think it's even like, I mean, I don't know how salty I'd be bloody salty if I came up with all these ideas and then a year down the line, and all of a sudden I'm seeing them come to market and everyone's like, ooh. So
a lot of people have that experience dealing with like mass manufacturing. It's distasteful at times.
Yeah.
Are there any
shows with Hydra for more information?
Yeah. Are there still any holdouts in the racing scene that are still like on like brushed motors or anything, or is everyone is everyone staying up to date with the latest stuff in racing?
I think most people nowadays are brushless. I don't really see. I mean, I know some of the people, because I've only been in this hobby for a couple of years, and I know the people that have been in it for a lot longer have got shelves of old whoops that are all brushed that they don't use or fly anymore.
Curry indicating towards the shelf, presumably.
Yes, sorry, yeah, a whole bunch of them up there. They work quite nicely as very gentle quads to fly around indoors and be able to go through little gaps. But yeah, you were just talking about like the kV of motors, like 24, 26. If I try and fly a 22,000 kV indoors, it's a nightmare. It's like it's like a pinball watching it bounce off the wall. That's just my flying. I'm sure in the hands of someone half decent, it would be fine, but not for me.
There is a learning curve to when you're flying. There's certain things that you can do to tame the whoop a little bit, but there is definitely a learning curve to flying the smaller quads, say in your front room or under your sofa or something like that. The one thing you could do is lower the camera angle, so have it almost like 5 degrees rather than something like 45 degrees. You could definitely that way. Well, I can't think there was another one. My mind's gone blank.
I mean, is everyone? What about because there was the HV batteries, right? That was a big thing a while ago. Is like everyone gone HV? Has everyone given up on HV? What's the standard there? What about batteries?
It's preference, I think. Most people I know that fly whoops these days all fly HV batteries now. But there in itself is a bit of a nightmare, because batteries they're like gold dust. They're very hard to get hold of, and you tend to find that you'll end up buying them from AliExpress or places like that, really, because they don't have, the shops in the UK don't have good stock of them, unfortunately, or they do, that they'll be selling things like Dogcom batteries rather than Tattoo ones, and there is an element of lipo snobbery in the hobby to a degree. I mean, I only fly Tattoo because I've tried a lot of the batteries, and they're just the ones that perform the best for me. They give me that oomph really at the very end when you're starting to feel the sag of the battery. They still keep giving you and giving you.
Hello, Zoe.
Hey, Zoe.
Zoe FPV in the chat. Hello. Hope you're doing well.
3D whoops. Oh, I've never tried that. I don't think I could. I mean, you're the
Power
master
to weight
of 3D.
ratio. I mean, you need a lot of power to hold 3D.
What about the props as well? I feel like props on whoops are fairly kind of sculpted. I feel like they're not very 3D. They're very asymmetrical.
You'd throw away a lot of thrust in reverse thrust. I'm not sure it would actually hold its weight.
No. Well, a lot of people. So you've got the turtle mode option on there. So for anyone that's listening, is if your whip lands on its top, you can turtle mode and then get right up. But the problem with whips is there's no control on it. You basically just go full throttle with when you turtle mode. So a lot of people don't actually turtle mode because it can pop an ESC on the flight controller.
Yeah. I remember it was a thing a couple of years ago where turtle mode only worked on some whoops because they just didn't all have enough power. Some of them were too heavy and couldn't.
Yeah. If you've got an ultra lightweight whoop, 9 times out of 10, even a bi-blade will push it over. But if your whoop's say pushing 20 grams and you've got a bi-blade on it, you're probably just going to spin on the floor. You're not really going to be able to right yourself up. So, but the props themselves, they're pretty robust things. I think I've never had a problem with any of the props, and the most problems I do see are them pinging off in a severe crash, because they're all push fit essentially. So in a really big crash, you can ping one off and it can go flying somewhere, and they're a nightmare to find in the dark.
Oh, I remember trying to change props to test out different props, and if I wasn't careful, I just pulled the shaft clean out of the motor. They were a nightmare.
Oh,
yeah.
So there's actually a tool out in the market now. This thing is like coveted. It's called the Prop Popper. I think it was made by a chap called Winson FPV. And Tiny Whip sell it. This thing is it's like a little hook with a press on the top, and you just hook under the prop and you press, and the prop just pops off. It's no more of this wrestling and cutting your fingers open and destroying all your. It's just
bleeding fingertips. It's way worse than trying to get a big 5-inch prop off, because those things are just sharp and tiny, sharp edges and nothing else.
Yeah, you do end up with some slight cuts, or your fingers develop calluses like you're playing guitar or something, and then you just start tacking them on.
Nice. So how about props then? Like, is there like a standard prop that everyone's using? Do you just get whatever you can get hold of? Like buys, tries? I mean, I feel like quad blades was standard like a few years ago, so presumably things have moved on since then.
Yeah, so with the power of the motors these days and the lightweight of them, you don't necessarily need quad blades anymore. Tri-blades seem to be the most used prop in tiny whoops. You get some people that fly bi-blades because they just like the feel of bi-blades. I personally fly bi-blades because I like to have that kind of skid feel in a turn. Essentially, tri-blades will give you a lot of grip in a turn, so you could pretty much come up to a gate full pelt, turn, and then go the other way kind of thing. With bi-blades, it's more of a you got to swoop in and you got to come in, you got to make the line right. So tri-blades definitely. For makes, HQ, Gemfan, they're the ones that I primarily see most people use. HQ are more, well, I think the consensus, as far as I understand it, is that HQ make efficient props. Gemfan makes sort of like what's really grippy props, essentially props that will allow you to get that turn on a dime kind of thing into and out of whatever it is you're doing.
As long as you've got the battery to do it.
As long as you've got as long as your lipo's not screaming at you.
Speaking of screaming lipos, one thing that's kind of exploded over the last couple of years has been going from everyone flying PH 2.0 and hating it to through a brief phase where people are like, I'll just solder an XT30 on with like Bob Ruge and that, flying the larger toothpick stuff. And now we're seeing like, what are we up to? 3 different standards for plus the BT 2.0. There's a Beta FPV one and a GMB one and a third one that appeared recently. So what's the deal with all that?
So as I understand it, so BT 2.0 came in, and because it's essentially something like it's tantamount to like an XT10. So it just allows a lot more current to pass through. So it's better than either the rolled or folded pins that you can get from the PH connectors. So it just allows a lot more current to pass through. But as I understood it, I think Beta FPV had, because it was a licensed product from Beta FPV. So a lot of people didn't want to. I don't think a lot of companies wanted to pay the license, and then GMB
they went the Apple accessory route. Then, like, yeah, of course, anyone can use this. if you pay us.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And I think most companies did sort of like, because you just saw a lot of pilots switch to BT2. So anyone that was making a LiPo would probably see a dip in PH battery sales. So they just thought, okay, well, if we're making these little 1S sticks and people just aren't using them because of the PH connector, let's switch over. But G&B did something rather clever, actually. They've, have you heard of the A30? So there's this new connector that's just come out, which is pretty much exactly the same as a BT2 connector. But what they've done is they've put a groove on the LiPo side. So it's kind of like a guide groove, so that the connector is comparably different to the BT2 connector, that it doesn't infringe on anything, but you can actually still use BT2 LiPos in the plug. So it's brilliant. So nice. I think a lot of people are switching over potentially to the A30s. It's a much of a muchness, really. If even they're exactly the same. They both deliver the same amount of current. And they're both the same size pins.
What's your preference? What do you find easier to? Because ultimately, it's like, can I easily buy the battery leads and can I easily buy the batteries? What's the easiest to get hold of?
So I use sticks now, so I don't actually have any battery leads. So the lead comes on the connector itself, which is a BT2 connector. But most of the LiPos I buy are stick LiPo, so they actually have a connector on the top rather than a cable. Again, a weight saving thing. But for connectors on the actual whoop side, it doesn't really matter. You can use the A30 or the BT, or well, if you're using PH batteries. But for any LiPo that has a BT2 connector on it, you can use an A30 or a BT on the whoop. It's interchangeable.
I'm just wondering what the easiest type of LiPo to get. So it's BT2, the best selection.
Tattoo probably. Tattoo are probably the best ones, or the easiest ones to get hold of. There always seems to be good stock on AliExpress for those. Plus all the major companies in America like Tiny Whoop and Weebleed, and I think FYS Crafts, they generally stock all of those now, BT2 LiPos. But it's just the name of the actual connector. So, so that's what I would advise anyone to go for if they were looking to buy some LiPos. PH is absolutely fine. If you're just getting into it, PH is absolutely fine. It's going to give you enough flight time, and it's going to get you, in the air, and the LiPos will last just as long as BT2 ones.
I use them for my lazy house cruising. I've got a Mobilite, which is 19 grams on a 75mm frame, and can cruise around the house on a PH 2.0. I'm not pushing it, and it gets me like 5 minutes in the air.
Yeah,
so at that rate, it's enough to get that sort of power through on such an efficient quad. If it's not racing.
Yeah, so because I mainly race them, pretty much all of my LiPos are BT2 connectors. So it just makes it easier for me to, if I'm going to do some sort of light cruising or freestyling, I'll just use the same LiPos essentially. But it doesn't really matter if you're just starting out. If you're racing, then I would probably say, or I would push you to say to go towards BT2, just because you're just going to. It eliminates that sag towards the middle and the end of the battery when you're really pushing to try and finish off your 3 laps or however many laps you're doing. You're just not going to feel that sag, and you can keep pushing it. And then
it would be wonderful to take off and not instantly be down to 3.6 volts. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well. Yeah, when you take off, you're still at 4 volts just for about 5 seconds, and then you're into the 3s. But it's really good. So BT2 LiPos for chargers. There's so many different options for chargers at the moment. The Whoop Store is the main one that everyone's getting at the moment, because it just takes a lot of the pain out of the process. Really, you can storage charge them very easily on that. So I would recommend the Whoop Store if anyone was going to get one. In terms of a full quad, a bind and fly is pretty good. If you're just starting out and you want to get into it, I would probably recommend or point you towards a bind and fly, which is you get the whole thing in one essentially for maybe £100. And Happy Model do them. You get the Happy Model Mobula 6 and the Mobula 7. Beta FPV have got them. Oh, that's the Whoop Store, yeah. So that's a godsend for any Whoop pilot essentially.
Fly. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it really gives you. It just takes the pain out, so you can change straight up to storage charging those lipos the moment you've used them, because it was always a bit of a pain to storage charge and back down to 3.85 volts. You'd have to either hawk the charger, or you'd have to know your charger well enough that you could
Type C input as well, so you can just
Yeah.
take like a phone power bank and charge a Whoop. That's handy.
Yeah.
This looks interesting.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they're kind of like the standard now. To be honest with you, this is like version 3 that you're looking at the moment, but they're they just make life a lot easier.
How long did it take to get storage charging on Whoops? It seems like it's an eternity. It was like 5 years before a product came out that would actually storage charge, rather than you just take a fistful of puffy cells out of the bag.
Oh,
Get
God,
the winter every year.
I'd say it's probably only been in the last year and a half that we've actually had a solution like the Whoop Store to just remove it. I've been using like a parallel board on my Sky RC charger, and I've just been having to parallel charge, parallel storage on those ones. So it's not ideal at all.
Same here.
Yeah, so it does make it a lot easier.
It is, and if you modern chargers still won't do it, and I've even asked about it. Like last time I looked at a charger, and it's like, can you do 1S storage on this? They're like, no, that's not a thing. So yeah, I think the Whoop Store is the only sort of commercial product I know about that will storage charge 1Ss. And
I
that
could
is
do
it.
Is that
one
why
S
it's got
off
its
of
name?
a parallel.
Yeah, you can do it in parallel with a parallel board, but then you're just treating like each 1S.
No. You can do
as a
it
different
as a
cell.
1S on a parallel board. It'll take a 1S cell, but in order to get 1S to work, it expects the 1S cell to present a voltage both on like the JST, so on the whatever it's called, the balance port, and the other port. So what you have to do is you have to bridge the 1S pin on the balance port with the actual charge pin that's like an XT30, and then put a PH2 off that or something. So you like split the LiPo so it goes to both.
Oh, so you can make a lead up, split it that way, and do it.
Yeah. And then it thinks, oh yeah, I can do that because I can balance charge this 1S, even though it's 1S, and balance charge doesn't mean anything with 1S. It's just charging.
I will balance this cell against the other non-cells.
There's some dumb logic in there where even if it's one cell, it's like I must have it connected to both, otherwise I won't be able to tell what voltage the individual cell is at. There's only one cell. It doesn't make that leap.
Interesting. I mean, I just see Numbskulls posted something about like a Crossfire something. So what radio stuff is generally common? Because I mean, last time I had anything to do with Whoops, it was like the SPI receivers on their FastSky. So it was a bit of a while ago. Exactly.
Yeah. So ELRS basically it came out and it just kind of blew all the competition, for me anyway. It blew all the competition out of the water, and I didn't really see the point in using another receiver type. I mean, they've got Crossfire Whoops out now, and I think there's a lot of people that are rejoicing now that it's like finally it's taken that long to get out. But for a radio, anything that actually has an ELRS protocol built in, I should think about the Crossfire. Yeah, I think a lot of people they've been asking for this for a very long time. And Newbie Drone finally came to market with it, and I think everyone was like, "Yay, finally!"
I don't really want an antenna that's twice the size of my quad, though.
Yeah, I personally don't use it, just because I find the ELRS antennas are just tiny as hell. I mean, either it's a little ceramic tower, which is very, very tiny, or it's a copper wire.
Yeah.
And the distance you can get on those things is just, in comparison to like FrSky and the old protocols, it's just unreal. It's crazy. And I had this conversation with one of my friends at the club. He doesn't seem to think he can feel the difference between, or the latency difference between ELRS and say old FrSky. I certainly could. The moment I started using ELRS, it was like, oh whoa, okay, I'm actually in control of this now. This is responding to what I'm telling it to do, and I'm not getting micro fail safes or telemetry issues when I'm literally about 10 meters away from myself.
Yeah, you don't just fly behind yourself and then suddenly find that the quad's on the floor for no reason.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
I feel like we're just watching Stephen do some shopping now.
Yeah,
I was going to go to the one that he was recommending earlier.
money's
So that
about
was
to-
75 quid. What I was going to point people to was the one he was talking about earlier, which I do have myself. I've got a couple of these, the little diamond F4 board. It's absolutely minute, and it weighs almost nothing, and it's got a VTX built on as well. So if you can get them, you just plug your camera in there and then some solder pads for the motors. And you have to solder the motors, but it's designed to be super light. So yeah, you end up with some impressive flight times once you've got this kind of weight saving.
Yeah, it's sort of like the average weight for a race whip these days, I think, is around 16 to 17 grams. Yeah, it's as tiny as hell. It is really, really light. But you've got people normally come into those competitions and they've made frame modifications. They've got ultra lightweight canopies. I've seen one guy come in. He had gone round and dremeled holes in the whoop ducts on the entire frame. He'd literally systematically gone around the entire frame and dremeled holes in it as an attempt to save weight. So people do go to extreme lengths to try and.
Oh, and the Rennie screws as well. I've forgotten about them. Impossible, extremely expensive screws that are tiny.
Yeah, there's nylon glass screws. They do actually, crazily enough, they do actually save you some weight, but you're gram pinching then.
They're like 50 pence a screw as well, and you can only
They're
buy
ridiculous.
them in bags of 1,000 or something stupid.
They are ridiculous, yeah.
Nice.
What we tend to do is that we do a group order, so we put like a post out on Facebook and to everyone and say, "Hey, we're going to buy some screws," and then we try and get as many people involved in as possible. That way,
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it takes the cost out of it quite a bit.
Someone needs to just parcel them up and do bags of 20 of them on eBay.
Well, Drone Junkie used to sell them. So there's sadly it's not up anymore. It closed down this year. Was Race Castle and Drone Junkie, and the chap that run it, Jem, he had a bunch of Rennie screws that I bought from him. I just thought it was easiest because he's based in the UK. He's selling them quite cheap. But when I spoke to him, he's like, it's the pain in the ass to get them because they cost a bloody bundle, and he has to wait weeks for them to come from China sometimes. So
and then he's got to spend hours pouring one massive bag of screws into hundreds of tiny bags.
Yeah. He allows you to
be like, you only gave me 19. I ordered 20.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, you could order it per screw, which I thought was a bit of a weird thing to do. Really, I just
sell it by weight, shouldn't you? Like an ounce.
It's a lot of
I
screws.
think they make convenient little bags for that as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what about? I was going to say, what about video system? Has that stayed analog because it's easier and lighter, or have people started to transition to HD0, or is there no advantage in this sort of scale of racing?
So analog does have the advantage because with HD0 you're immediately adding a straight up 4 gram VTX to the whole setup. So
for a Whoop, which is like 19 grams, so you're adding like an extra quarter of the weight straight on there.
Whoops become obese.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people out there are doing really good work to try and reduce the weight by printing these light foam dense canopies, or trying to do their own grommets. Personally, my method is to take a pair of snips and start cutting away at the frame, because there's small things like you could do, like cut some spokes away. It doesn't really
you're going to say the VTX for a second. No. Shaving off the side of the HD0 VTX with a pair of snips. We don't need that.
So they give you a UFL connector on there if you want to have a UFL, but I actually solder a copper wire to the active element on it, just because it's 0.14 of a gram saved.
And you're going to be like 10 meters away from the Whoop, so who cares?
Yeah. Well, even on that thing, I can still fly up to about 200 foot, and I still get clear signal on the VTX with a copper wire, so it's absolutely fine. I raced HD0 at Popham this year. Took first place on the first day, didn't mean to. I felt that was a bit cheeky, winning the competition I'd set up. It's great. To be honest with you, if I could, I would fly HD0 all the time, or I'd race HD0 all the time. It's just the clarity of image that you get. Everything is telegraphed. Everything is, you can see so clearly with it. There's no latency problems. Even when maybe you've got 4 or 5 whoops coming up to a gate, and depending on what antenna setup you've got on your goggles, when analog whoops cross over, you could potentially get bleeding on signal. You could just get some fuzz in the screen. I just don't get that with HDZ. I get maybe a little bit of speckles, the rainbow speckles, but I mean that happens split second, and then I'm clear picture again. So HDZ for me, I would recommend anyone to do HDZ. If you're going to do it though, make sure you print a canopy that can cover or encase the entire VTX, because otherwise you'll just have a camera that sits right at the very front of it, and you'll have all this VTX space at the back that's exposed, unless you want to run the shields, but the shields themselves will add more weight on top of it. So it just becomes a losing fight in the end.
And you've got that little MIPI cable you've got to squirrel away and make sure it doesn't get snagged on anything as well.
Yeah, so I guess that's the ultimate weak point for me. The MIPI cable is a real weak point. If you're not very careful with how you place it, a small prang dent one of those tiny little microfibered cables, and that's it. That's the MIPI cable gone, and you'll have to go and pay £6 to buy another one. And that's what I've gone through quite a lot of MIPI cables doing that, just trying to find the best way to mount it, to try and mount the cable so that it doesn't hit anything. Put foam under the camera canopy to try and sort of protect it. If you're in a
blobs of glue,
yeah, essentially, if you're flying it in a bigger quad, I've never heard of anyone flying anything bigger than a warp with a HD0 have a MIPI problem, because the MIPI's under like 5 inches or 5 millimeters of carbon, so it's never going to get touched.
On larger quads, I tended to damage those cables on something when I was installing them or trying to fold them round a sharp bend. But once they were installed, I never had any issues with them.
Yeah, exactly, and it's the same thing. It just becomes a challenge to find the correct mounting solution when you're putting it, because you can run the VTX on top, you can run it underneath in the frame. There's just loads of different variations and options on how you actually build the whip itself.
Do you think the extra weight is going to encourage people to have like digital only races where there's more of a level playing field and people can bask in the beautiful Technicolor glory of their picture without worrying about being undertaken by some stinking kid on a like 15-gram lightning fast whoop?
I hope. Well, eventually, yeah. We've started. So Popham did include HD0 this year, and I would like to do that going forward. Maybe have a spec HD0 race where the all-up weight is going to be sort of 21 grams or something like that, and 21 grams and above. They actually do a spec race at the moment in America. It's called the Underground Whoop League, and it's 75 mil based. I think the all-up weight for that has to be 40 grams. So if you build something like, I think it's 40 grams, including the battery.
That's quite a lot, isn't it?
It is quite. The whole idea is it makes the 75 mil feel slightly more like a bigger quad. So you can't just throw it into turns and expect it to respond, because you're going to have too much inertia and weight and you'll drift out of the corner. So it levels the playing field so that it now becomes about the skill of the pilot when you're doing these races. And I've seen some of them. They look fantastic. You can still go really fast, and the courses are tailored to be slightly different. With a whip track, you'd probably have a gate here, a gate there, a gate here, a gate there, and it'd just be like a carnage of going through it. But these ones are just sort of like gliding through sweeping turns, more like
more like an American car as well. So they probably feel more at home. You can't turn unless you practically stopped. Otherwise, you sort of wobble and.
Yeah, there's a few of those in there. So I would love to do a spec HDZ race if I could get one in the UK. I think a lot of people would probably say at the moment it's just a bit too heavy, and I so this is speculation in my own head. With because like Carl's come out recently with like a V3 for the race VTX, I'm kind of the mindset that a V2 for the Whoop board is coming out at some point. I mean, it has to. We've had that Whoop board for a year and a half now. It's due an update. So potentially a lighter VTX is around the corner. I don't necessarily know, but that would be
It's a
fantastic.
question of when they get through their backlog of chips that are sitting in their warehouse, I guess, and then they go to print some more, and maybe there's a smaller option available to them, makes everything smaller and lighter. Who knows?
That would be great, I suppose. So you've got there are a couple of pilots in the industry that are trying to push to get manufacturers to make products that are lighter. So you've just had the beta airframe that's just come out. It's a 65mm frame, but they've used less material in the injection mold, so it's much lighter. It has a much lower profile, and I think a lot of people are going to transition to the airframe going forward, just because it's lighter overall. Indoor Flying Leeds Trinity University. Is that Whoop related? So I just saw Caroline's message
Apparently
pop up.
so. Apparently so.
It is indeed, yeah.
Beginning
awesome.
this Saturday.
That's brilliant, actually. I did reach out to a lot of the people that I know that do Whoop racing around the UK and in Europe, just to get a list of things to sort of reel off. So if I do it from the beginning of the year, you have this competition run. It's called the Birmingham International Race Day, and it's hosted by a chap called Matt Snell, and it's an international competition. Last year we had people from Germany, people from Italy, people from Poland come over, and a chap called Phobos won the race. But that's a really intense competition, and appended to that weekend we do a Whoop house. So we hire a big house, get as many people to stay there as possible, and we do like a mini competition and races in the actual house as well.
Cool.
It was brilliant last year. We had so much fun doing that. So that's in January. Normally hosted in Birmingham in January. The next one is the Wings and Wheels is the next big event. You're aware of Wings and Wheels, I believe. Yeah,
North Weald, middle of June, sort of that one.
Yeah. That's hosted by, there's a group of people, they call themselves, we're called the Whoop Council. We're a group of people that are trying to create more Whoop events in the UK. So we've all come together, and we're all pulling our resources, all of our equipment, gates, HDC VRXs, event VRXs, things like that, to try and so just reduce the cost for anyone that's having to sort of wants to do something like this. And we're trying to sort of host more. So I used a lot of the things that they supplied for Popham, which was really useful. So there's Wings and Wheels. Popham, we hope to make a calendar feature going forwards. I think we had a really good time this year round. So, and I think the guys in the airfield were quite happy with the response. So hopefully next year we can do another one.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yep. Then so that's around September time, and then towards the end of the year, you've got SGDC. It's the South Gloucester Drone Club based in Bristol. They do a little mini Whoop league. It's like five Whoop races from October to January. It's one race a month, and that's really good. Great little environment to get involved with. Everyone's really, really helpful there. The club's just a really nice club to visit. Actually, they've got this massive venue in a sports complex, and the Whoops it's just really nice to go to. So for big events, that's in the UK. That's all I'm aware of at the moment. We hope we're going to make some more events in the coming years, but because I've only been in this hobby for a couple of years. When I first joined the Hanworth group, they used to tell me that prior to me coming, they hosted these Whoop nights, but they were always chock-a-block with pilots. They always had too many pilots to actually be able to get up and fly, sort of thing. And then COVID happened, lockdown happened, and now you kind of limited to maybe 4 or 5 pilots a night if you're lucky. So it's a bit difficult to do sort of like organized races like that. So the question is, has the hobby peaked? Have I come in at the arse end of it, and it's just kind of like tapering off now? Or so I think that's where the Whip Council comes in. They want to try and promote and generate more events for a lot of people to go to.
So if anyone is listening who's like has a little local group or something and wants to get involved, maybe host an event, a wider, bigger national event, how do they get in touch with the Whip Council? Where's the light to shine in the sky?
They're pretty uncontactable, actually. I would say, it's just a Facebook group. I would say in the first instance, if you reach out to, I'm going to throw names out now, and they're probably going to kill me for this. So you can reach out to myself. My name's Chris Smith, or Dirty McStinky. Matt Snell, who runs the Birmingham one. Mike Brooks, who runs the Drone Racing Cornwall Club. Paul Jaggers, who runs the London Indoor Flying Club. I think he doesn't necessarily run two. He does the Indoor London Club, which is a bar in London, actually, which is a quite cool place to go and fly. And then he also is a member of the Hanworth Club, which is in Feltham. So if you reach out to any one of us, I'm pretty sure there was a few other names in the group that I'm forgetting, but if you just reach out to one of us, we'll be in contact. Matt's really active in the scene. Paul's active in the scene. So is Mike. So we all try to keep as our ear to the ground as much as possible with regards to any news for whooping in the UK.
And where does outside of the council, where does sort of a lot of whip stuff get? Sort of where does it happen? Is it on Facebook? Is there a Discord? Is it just people knowing each other?
Yeah, so it is a bit of I found it initially difficult at first to find information on this, but once you find one FPV group, like it becomes you just get introduced to all of them all of a sudden. So there's Tiny Whip UK. There's a Facebook group page on called Tiny Whip UK, and that's we post a lot of information on there. If anyone's a member of that, it's free to join. You'll generally get most of the information that we find out from there. Matt always shares posts from Birmingham. Mike shares posts. So all of the information that we do get, we drop into that chat. So I would say it's not a chat, it's a Facebook page. So Tiny Whip UK is probably the best place to go for that. There isn't really far short of that. It becomes a case of who you know, really. And that's the problem with the hobby. It's because it's so niche and it's so small. There probably
there's no league table or website or something where people go.
No. So that's one of the ideas that we're actually bounding around at the moment is doing a whoop league that is done over a year and it incorporates all of the big events. So they'll all contribute to points over the year in the league. And then would also do something like set races. So one club would publish a track, and then every other club has to race that track and set the best time they could possibly set on that. It's kind of interaction between clubs, because there's only maybe about 4 or 5, well, 5 now that Caroline's just pointed out one there that I wasn't aware of. But there aren't that many clubs that I know of in the UK. You've got Hanworth. You did have Race Castle. Sadly, that's not happening anymore. You have Drone Racing Cornwall, which is quite a big one. Drone Circle is based up in Manchester. They are trying to reignite. They used to do a lot of local work races, but they're trying to reignite that. That one's done by Craig Hannon and Dan Carpy, I believe. And those are the only ones that I kind of really know of. Like the bigger clubs that kind of interact. SGDC's, I think, is more 5-inch racing focused, but they do sort of like in the downtime they do the little mini whoop league. So it would be good if we could get all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there must be a bunch of the sort of 5-inch quad clubs that are coming into winter are going to be doing this and this. I mean, and I know, just thinking about it, I mean, at the moment the Team GBR, the 5-inch racing team that the BMFA have sponsored to go out to Korea and do their national racing. That's going on at the moment. They're at the World Drone Racing Championships, or whichever particular combination of words describes that event out in Korea at the moment. And Cerberus, who runs Killer Quads, has just been made chairman of the BDRA. I know he's held tiny events before, so I wonder whether there might be some kind of collaboration there. That would be nice.
Yeah, so he works quite closely with Matt Snell. Actually, he did the race directing for Birmingham. I would suspect he's going to be doing it again for the Birmingham coming up. So yeah, Cerberus has done quite a few things, and he does do a little local whoop night at a pub in Birmingham. I can't remember what nights they are though. Just thinking about it, actually, there's two more. There is a tiny whoop club in Hull, but I can't remember who runs it. And there is a whoop night hosted down in Brighton by a chap called Mike Pinker.
Jack, you must know this person. Come back to us. He's not coming back.
Also, if there's any web developers out there who like tiny whoop, please, for the love of God, someone just put all this information somewhere people can find it. Screaming out for it, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a takeaway for me off of this, is to actually try and consolidate somewhere that's easy for everyone to get to have access to this information, for sure, where we can then post up all of this good stuff and get people involved.
It sounds
even
like
just a Google Doc for the moment.
have a magic list of bookmarks, and once you've got this magic list of like 37 special bookmarks to various groups and forums on the internet, you're on the inside.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, you're definitely much on the outside looking in, and then we might invite you in, and then we'll assess if we like you or not first, and if we like you.
You've got to take the knowledge, and you've got to be able to recite the 37 Whoop chapters of the UK without prompting, because you're not allowed to write it down.
And you will be judged by the Whoop Council and your entry voted on.
Punishments are quite severe, I hear, so be careful. It's actually the community's really, really helpful. It's one of the boons about this hobby is the community behind tiny whoops and bigger quads in general are just so friendly and so helpful that you could just turn up with a bind and fly, goggles and a radio and say, I don't know what I'm doing, and someone will sit down, work it through with you, get you in the air. I think that's what we really like the most about it, is everyone is just, even if you're racing someone and you're in a competition and their whoop just suddenly just crashes out, you get like 10 pilots come running over to him. What can we do? Here's some props. Here's a frame. Here's a flight controller.
It's so much more friendly for beginners as well. Like the stakes are that much lower than trying to like scream around with a 6S 5-inch, which could do serious damage. With a little whoop, you're like, oh no, you hit me in the head. Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah, well, I mean,
after all,
there is a thing called face punching in the hobby, which is basically just flying your whoop into someone's face. They're so light that they're just not going to cause. I mean, the whoop would end up worse off than it flying into your face. It's just so light. But that's
with long hair have to watch out. That's the only thing.
Oh yeah.
That's why we usually target Tony, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had the whoop caught in my hair a few times. That's painful.
Challenging. Please, someone must have a prop remover tool. Please.
It normally just results in you pulling it out and you're left up with these giant curls in your hair that just stay there for weeks.
Could be worse.
Yeah. So I did want to. There was one other thing as well. There is a friend of mine, Marshall McFly, is hosting a whoop night on the 20th of October. That one is in Essex. I might be going to that if I can get myself to it, but it's just a one night whoop fun. Martian's a really nice guy. He's actually one of those people. He got me into winding my own motors. He's an absolute nut job. He loves it. I don't know. It's one of those people that likes that kind of pain. Here he is.
Hello.
So yeah.
Popping up there.
So if anyone is actually interested in actually getting into winding your own motors, Tap Up Martian, great source of information, really friendly,
He's done
really
a
helpful.
video, right? If
He
you go
has.
looking for him on YouTube.
Yeah, he's done a few videos. I think he's doing something. He's planning something a little bit more where he's actually going to put a lot of information online for people to actually go and see. Because there is a few people out there that are now starting to do that.
I've done a lot of stuff with quads, but I've never considered winding a motor. Anytime I've looked at the information online, I've just shied away from it. So kudos. That's all I can say there.
Yeah, especially on those 702 motors. Oh my word! You go blind after 10 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully, we've kind of collected together an entire body of knowledge of whoops into one episode. Well, hopefully, there's sort of more events come out of it because I'm sure there are a lot of people that are flying in their own spaces. I've seen lots of tiny whoops just going around after a day at the field, so I'm sure they're around. It'd be good to kind of network everyone back together.
I see. Okay, yeah. It would. There are a lot of in solo whoop flyers, and I think there are a lot of other people that are potentially wanting to get into something not so much serious, but wanting to join a group of people that are all like-minded and just have fun flying the whoop. So if anyone wants to get in contact or needs help arranging an event, please reach out. We're really happy to do so. In fact, we'll encourage and we'll try and make it the best event we can for you guys.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully all that happens. But thank you very much for coming along tonight.
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Wow, it's been great. You have been listening to Let's Drone Out. Tonight we have had Curry.
Goodbye.
We've had Stephen.
Good luck to all you whoop flyers over the winter.
We have had Chris/Dirty McStinky.
Adios.
And I have been Andrew/Frank. Jack left us early in the show. Hopefully we'll see him again shortly. But thank you for listening to Let's Drone Out, and good night.